Well, it's really good to be here tonight. I guess they put my slides up, or do I just do a talk? I don't have to have my slides. Wasn't sure what they wanted me to do, but maybe I'll show a few slides. We're not going to make it very long. I cannot emphasize enough the importance of early intervention. I got that. And I want to just straighten out one thing that was a little different than what the movie showed. That the doctor in there in the movie, that happened a little later. One of the things that saved it for me was when I was 2.5 years old. I went in and saw Bronson Crothers at Boston Children's Hospital, and she was a neurologist. And she checked me out for epilepsy and for deafness. And then she referred my mother to a little speech therapy school. 2 teachers taught out of their basement. And they were very good teachers. They just sort of know exactly how to work with these kids. They kind of just know how hard to push. Then when I was 3, she hired a nanny who just spent doing constant turn-taking games with me and my sister. We've got to teach these kids to take turns. Another thing, being a child of the 50s, table manners were just pounded in. I'm seeing too many smart kids on the spectrum. They don't know how to shop. They don't know how to get up in the morning. When I was very young, like in 1st grade, I got an alarm clock. I was expected to set it and use it. There were some expectations for behavior. A little temper tantrum, that's what it was called in the 50s in church. That just wasn't okay. But we have to think about the sensory issues, because fortunately they didn't play hard rock music in our church, because if they had, I would have had a problem with that. And I'm really glad to see that the center here is looking at the sensory issues. I see you had the steamroller out there. That's a device. It's a simpler kind of version of the squeeze machine, and it doesn't cost as much as the squeeze machine, but it does some of the same things. And people ask me, I don't want to try it. Well, I'm afraid I'll end up with some, really ridiculous picture on the internet, so probably don't really want to try it. But sensory issues, there's a lot of places that overlook sensory issues. You can have a situation where maybe the child can't tolerate the shopping mall because there's just too much noise there. When I was a little kid, loud sounds hurt my ears. I couldn't stand to be hugged. It was like a tidal wave of stimulation washing over me. Now, the thing about these sensory issues is they're very variable. One child may hate running water. Another child may like to play with running water. But the high-pitched sounds tend to be the worst. One kid's going to respond well to deep pressure to calm them down. Another kid's not going to respond to it. It's real variable. But these sensory problems are real. Well, Dr. Bronson Crothers tested my hearing, and my auditory threshold was normal. But that tells you absolutely nothing about auditory detail. That's the ability to hear the hard consonant sounds. If everybody talked to me very slowly, directly to me, I could understand. But when the grown-ups went fast, then it just all went into gibberish. And then there's some kids, and I don't have this problem, where hearing fades in and out like a bad mobile phone connection. Another big problem is attention shifting slowness. It takes a much longer time to shift back and forth between 2 different things. This is some work that was done by Ami Klin at Yale, and they showed people on the spectrum, Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf? I don't know, boring social movie. I fall asleep on a plane going to that one, But when they showed The Day the Earth Stood Still and my TV was broken, I made sure I found a seat where it had one that worked, because that's sort of more my speed. But the yellow line's looking at the eyes. But the thing that's important to me in this picture is look at how many times the yellow line looks back and forth compared to the red line. Attention shifting slowness. This shows it absolutely perfectly. Now, the paper didn't even say anything about that. But, social stuff, how are you going to be social when attention shifting is so slow? There's other people on the spectrum, and I'm not one of them, where images kind of break up into like a mosaic. I don't have this problem. These kids are going to be auditory thinkers. Now, how do you know if the kid's got something wrong with the visual system? Now, it's back here in the back third of the brain. These are the kids that hate escalators. These are the kids that can't stand fluorescent lights. I had a dyslexic student years ago that had this problem. And fluorescent lights, it was like living in a discotheque. It was terrible for her. And you go in and you test the eyes, and the eyes can be more or less normal. It's not in the eyeball. It's back here in the visual cortex. There's a number of students where when they go to read, the print jiggles on the page, especially when it's white paper with black print. I've found that this is real common. I teach a class in livestock handling. My students have to lay out circular designs, and I'm finding 1 or 2 of these every semester in class. I can tell by the way they do the drawings, they cannot draw the circles. They cannot draw a line and just make 3 half circles like this. They just can't do that. So what are some of the simple things you can do? You know, it'd be stupid for a child to flunk out of school because you didn't give them a laptop computer, because a TV-type computer flickers, or get him away from the fluorescent lights, get his desk over by the window. And there's been kids that have been helped by colored lenses. There was one lady here in Colorado, her 6-year-old could tolerate 5 minutes at the local Walmart. She tried on some different colored glasses, and she can now do an hour of Walmart. You know, why does that intervention work? Well, it has something to do with these circuits back here that handle shape, color, motion, and texture, and those circuits have to work together. Something's wrong with that. If you can figure that out today, that's the binding problem in vision research. But for some people, you get the right colored glasses, and it fixes the problem. I don't know why it works, but it does. And then some people say, well, that's just rubbish. Well, the problem is, if you had 10 kids with autism, this may only help 1 or 2. You see, this is the problem with the sensory things. It's so variable. Out of 10 kids with autism, maybe 1 is a pressure responder and is really going to respond to that steamroller device. And then you're going to have maybe 2 that hate it. You know, this is the variability issue. You know, and then you have a child that remains nonverbal, and oftentimes they're absolutely can't screen out the background noise. I know people that are verbal that are monochannel. They can't see and hear at the same time. You know, these are real things. Scientists have learned a lot about the brain. And if you want to look up some of the brain research, you can go on the PubMed database, PUBMED, and look it up. There's a lot of things that are known. You know, when they just say they don't know how it works, there's things that have been learned. And one of the things is the back part of the brain gets used a whole lot more. Word-based tasks tend to be processed in the back part of the brain, and the frontal cortex, that's the brain's executive function, that gets used a whole lot less. You see, when you hear a word, you see a word, you speak a word, or you think about a word, see how different parts of the brain are turned on? Well, you've got to have inter-office communications. See, the brain's got 2 kinds of matter. You've got gray matter, that's sort of the brain's integrated circuits. You know, each part of the brain kind of has a different function. And then the whole middle part of the brain is white matter. It connects everything to everything else. And it's in these inter-office connections between different parts of the brain where you have the problems. And I'm a visual thinker. So to understand sort of the concept of how the brain is made, I have to relate it to something I can visualize, like an office building. You see, and this is how I think, you know, thinking in pictures. The movie did a great job of showing how I think. You got the president up there on the top of the office tower. He's the chief executive. Then you got the division vice presidents. That's the language part. And then down below that, you've got things like, the good geek stuff, like mathematics, computer programming, engineering department, visual thinking. And one of the things I'm getting very concerned about today is I'm seeing too many smart, geeky kids that kind of are going nowhere. First of all, they didn't have some basic social rules pounded in. Another thing that really helped me, and this was shown beautifully in the movie, was my science teacher. Because now I had a goal. Now I had a reason to study. Where before I wasn't studying because I didn't have any reason to study. But now I wanted to become a scientist. This sort of is the inter-office communications in the brain. And, you know, different disorders, you're going to get different variations in where some of these connections are disrupted. But we could call this brain airlines. And on the East Coast, we cancel a pile of flights on the East Coast. You know, but then out there in geek land out on the West Coast, and you get on the higher end of the spectrum, you may have extra flights. You know, us geeks out there on the West Coast could care less about the stupid suits up in the office. We're just going to give them one dial-up. That's all they need. Now, I cannot emphasize enough the importance of developing strengths. One of the problems you have in autism, and plus some other disorders too, is uneven skills. Oftentimes there's a tendency to be good at one thing and bad at something else. And too often there's too much emphasis on the disability and not enough emphasis on building up the area of strength. And this is a picture that a 9-year-old drew in perspective. And around 3rd or 4th grade, that's when my art ability really started to show up. You don't usually see it at 4 or 5, but around 3rd or 4th grade, you'll see it. And my mother really, really encouraged my art. And she also encouraged me to do art of different things. Okay, I used to like to draw horses all the time. Well, let's do a picture of where the horse is ridden to. Let's do a picture of the horse's stable. In other words, take that thing the kid's fixated on, broaden it out. If he likes airplanes, let's use airplanes to teach math, airplanes to teach reading. Let's read about a place where an airplane